Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday, the 2nd of December, and in this programme tonight we'll be talking about the dramatic assassination on Iran's nuclear scientist. Not only was he Iran's top nuclear scientist, but he was also very much the architect of Iran's nuclear program after the last 20 years. So we are live, we are interactive tonight. I'm joined by my co-host, Regan King. Good to see you, Regan. How are you doing?
Very well, yeah. Excellent week, good start to the week. I understand you have an exciting event coming up the weekend as well.
What's that then? Remind me.
46th birthday? 46th
I don't give my age away, that's horrible.
Wish him happy birthday, everyone. Yeah, it's his 46th. Happy birthday.
I don't know how it got to be 46. I'll tell you what, time flies. It wasn't that long ago. I was in my late 20s like you were, and then,
well,
you know.
I'll catch up.
I'm an old man now. I'm an old man, what can you say? 4 years left till I'm 50. That's quite, I don't even want to contemplate that.
4 years.
So,
Time goes on.
Definitely.
So this evening, talking about a pretty major issue. The Friday, 27th of November, we saw this event which, what may seem distant to some of us, is actually quite cataclysmic. For many, the architect of the Iranian nuclear program was assassinated. We're live and interactive, and our key question for those of you who are watching the program is, was this action morally justified? The ex-head of the CIA, Simon, was talking about how this was a criminal act and it's essentially catastrophic and could cause havoc and was extremely disruptive. What do you think? Is such an action, I mean, we're talking about the architect of Iran's nuclear program. We are, I think, well aware of the human rights issues that Iran has really, gone against. What's going on here?
I think you have to put this in perspective and just analyse what the regime actually stands for. And the country is the Islamic Republic of Iran. In '79, they organised a coup against the Shah of Iran and the monarchy. They took over, created terror and mayhem, and were led by this extreme Shia Islamist ideology of wanting to export the Islamic Revolution. Now, if you have a nation, as you do in Iran, which is the world's leading sponsor of state terrorism, they support Hamas, Hezbollah. You've had Al-Qaeda leaders actually in Iran, combined with the fact as well that they are an absolute menace actually in the region. They have international terror networks throughout the Middle East, across Europe, into North and South America. They're working with drug cartels. And we've heard from Iranian leaders themselves that their desire is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, to destroy the West and create an apocalyptic scenario in order for their Messiah, the 12th Imam, to actually return. So when you take this all into account, and you have a nation that is working constantly for Israel's destruction, and knowing that the Jewish people have faced the Holocaust in the last century, in which over 6 million precious Jewish lives died on an industrial scale by the Nazis, is Israel going to sit back and allow this fanatical regime to build the world's most dangerous weapon to target Israel in the future? No. So therefore, by taking out, and we don't know that Israel was behind this. We believe that Israel's behind this because of the news reports and what was said by believed to be the Mossad. But essentially what this does is this completely puts back Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Well, it's not been a great year.
And how many people would die and the devastation caused by a nuclear weapon being fired? And so therefore, by taking out the chief scientist, you effectively damaging and putting back Iran's nuclear ambitions, which is sensible for the free world. If you want peace, security in the Middle East, you want to end the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region, you want to stop the likelihood of Islamist terrorist organizations getting hold of a dirty nuclear bomb that they could plant in London, Paris or Washington, killing hundreds of thousands of people, then I think the world should thank Israel and the United States for saving the free world.
So we've ended the year with this assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. We began the year with another pretty key event in which General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. It's not been an amazing year for Iran's plan against Israel and its plan for domination in the Middle East. What do we think this is going to lead to in the coming years? I mean, how exactly are things panning out, do we think?
Well, let's just put it this way. I think everything very much ties with the US presidential election and who's actually in the White House. Because I think if President Trump is able to win a kind of second term, and we know there are big legal battles going on in the States, and this election is not quite over yet. It's not guaranteed that Joe Biden will enter the White House on the 21st of January. And I think President Trump pulling out of the awful Iran deal in 2018, knowing that that deal just delayed Iran's ability to acquire nuclear weapons, never stopped their missile defense program or their support for international terrorism around the world, meant that if there was another 4 years of a Trump administration, then we would, beyond a shadow of a doubt, see the collapse of the Iranian regime. But with Joe Biden in, he's wanting to renew the Iran deal and resurrect it. This would spell catastrophe for the Iranian people and also the entire Middle East and also our own Western security.
We have an email here from Anita. Evening, Simon and Regan. It's lovely to see you both again. Your program is always so informative. Thank you for that, Anita. This incident involving the assassination is extremely worrying. The scientist himself must have realized he was a target as he was traveling in a bulletproof car. The conflicting reports, too, make it difficult to ascertain what actually happened. It was claimed at first that there was an ambush. CBN said 12 men were involved in initial accounts, yet afterwards we were told that it was a remote device. And certainly I believe that's the line that Iran is going with. One report suggested that a device bearing a logo linked to Israel was recovered at the scene. The President Hassan Rouhani has pledged retaliation, and it has been intimated that the Trump administration may have been involved. Biden's camp have certainly taken advantage of this fact. And there was a tweet suggesting that retaliation was not necessary as they should wait for a more, quote, responsible American leadership, end quote. Yet the Israeli intelligence suggests that there are 2 nuclear programs in progress, one of which is secret. And then the email concludes, it goes on a bit, is so worrying and so sad as Persia, as Iran was once known as. We're not always opposed to the Israelis. In Ezra 1, verse 1 through 4, we learn that Cyrus was appointed to build a temple for him, that is God, at Jerusalem in Judah. We need to pray for Iran and this regime. God bless you all.
We need to pray for the removal of this regime.
Yeah.
But if we're talking spiritually, then that Prince of Persia that came against Daniel is ruling and reigning over Iran at the moment, with its desire to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And so spiritually, that is what, and the ideology of the Iranian regime and its religious fanaticism can only be described as absolutely demonic.
In the history of the early church, there was a historian, Tertullian, who said the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And I'm sure viewers will be well acquainted with the horrifying stories of our Iranian brothers and sisters and the persecution that they often experience. I recently encountered 2 Iranian brothers who were sharing with me some of their harrowing story of how they actually came to faith, having witnessed persecution of the people who were seeking to evangelize them. And you know, we can look at, you're talking about this extremely fanatical Shia regime, and we can clearly see how so many people are being drawn to Christ as Savior and Lord, even through that immense hardship and persecution that's been going on, as you indicated earlier, for decades.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN report put together by none other than himself, Chris Mitchell, looking into the assassination on Iran's chief nuclear scientist last Friday.
The assassination took place just outside of Tehran. An Iranian journalist citing regime officials said the ambush began with a car bomb, and then a 12-member squad opened fire on the 3 cars with the nuclear scientist and his bodyguards. But one top Iranian official accused Israel of using remote electronic devices to carry out the assassination. While no one has claimed responsibility for the attack, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif blamed Israel, and Iran's President Rouhani pledged retaliation.
At the right time, the relevant officials will respond to this crime.
An Iranian newspaper suggested Iran attacked the Israeli port city of Haifa in order to inflict heavy casualties. On Sunday, the IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi visited Israel's northern border and said, "Our message is clear. We will remain fully prepared against any manifestation of aggression against us." Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically mentioned the chief scientist after revealing how Mossad covertly stole Iranians' atomic secrets.
This is how Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, head of Project Ahmad, put it. Remember that name, Fakhrizadeh.
Amos Yadlin, former chief of Israel's military intelligence, says Iran has twin tracks toward a nuclear bomb. The public side, where they enrich uranium under watch by the UN, and a secret military program headed by Fakhrizadeh.
The damage to the covert weaponization program is huge. No doubt that he was the core source of authority, knowledge, and organization of this program.
Yadlin sees 2 main options for Iranian leaders: wait for a potential Biden administration or retaliate now.
They can use their proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, or their Shia militia in Syria or Iraq, and they can go to an extreme step, which is launching missiles from Iran.
Biden supporters of the former vice president blasted the assassination. Former Obama CIA Director John Brennan tweeted, "This was a criminal act and highly reckless. It risks lethal retaliation and a new round of regional conflict. Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and to resist the urge to respond against any perceived culprits." For now, the region is waiting and watching for any response, and if it puts the Middle East on the brink of war. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Excellent report put together there by Chris Mitchell, and you can watch his program exclusively here on Revelation TV, Jerusalem Dateline. Program not to be missed. And we have a very special guest joining us all the way from the States, who is an Iranian and terrorism expert, none other than Eric Steckelbeck himself. So, Eric, welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Simon, it's great to be with you.
I'm glad you can be with us tonight. Eric, what are your thoughts on the events that occurred last Friday when Iran's chief nuclear scientist was assassinated, believed to be the work carried out by the infamous Israeli Mossad?
Yes, Simon, a potential game changer in the Middle East. Now, think of the year the Iranian regime has had. 2020 has been kind of tough on everyone, but Iran in particular, Simon, the year started January 3rd, 2020, with the elimination of the Iranian terror master, Qasem Soleimani. Now, as we come to a close here in 2020, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program has met his demise. And you have to think, Simon, that the Iranian regime is going to try to retaliate eventually. Perhaps they will wait to see what happens, as you guys mentioned, to see what happens if there will be a President Biden. We don't know that yet. That's still being worked out here in the U.S. But no matter who is in the White House, you would think they're going to try to retaliate in some way for the death of Fakhrizadeh, who was really irreplaceable, Simon, in terms of being the father of their nuclear weapons program. Now, how will they retaliate, I think, is a big question. Obviously, it seems that they're going to retaliate against Israel. Israel has not claimed responsibility for the takeout of Fakhrizadeh, but Iran is saying, we believe the Zionist entity did this. So how will they retaliate? Real quick, I think that's a big question. I think there's a few ways. Number one, through proxy, Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, perhaps out of Syria with some kind of rocket barrage out of Syria. And also, they have vowed to increase their uranium enrichment and just ramp up the activities in their nuclear weapons program. God forbid to all of those three options, Simon, but this may be what we're looking at. And of course, there is always the possibility that Iran and its proxies could attempt to target Israeli and Jewish targets worldwide, meaning embassies or consulates.
Eric, on that point on the possible Iranian retaliation, we see that they haven't retaliated after the attack in January on Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Al-Quds Force, the Iranian general when it comes to Iranian support for terrorism across the world. So my big question is not a danger that the Iranian regime could actually fall into America's and Israel's trap? That currently they want Iran to retaliate right now. We've seen that President Trump has deployed the nuclear B-52 bombers to Qatar, waiting in the wings for a possible Iranian strike. Could we see that Iranian retaliation could lead to a war in the Middle East, and this would give Israel and the United States the opportunity to destroy Iran's nuclear program forever, or certainly to destroy the infrastructure of Hezbollah or Hamas, knowing possibly that President Trump only has a few weeks in office in the White House?
Yeah, Simon, that's a possibility. You raise a lot of interesting points. Number one, we had that meeting just last weekend, right, between Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And both men met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. And just a few days later, we have Fakhrizadeh meeting his demise. So could this kind of be a situation where Israel and the U.S. says, okay, Iran, they're kind of goading them in a sense, I guess you could say, and to see if Iran retaliates. Now, back in January, Iran did retaliate. They launched several missiles at U.S. military bases in Iraq, but it wasn't the kind of massive retaliation that many feared. And by the way, the takeout of Soleimani and Fakhrizadeh, no matter what the retaliation is, as you guys said at the top, very much worth it. Fakhrizadeh was a man who, if he was successful in his plan to build Iran's nuclear weapons program to the point where Iran has the bomb, his demise, his death, saves perhaps millions of lives in the Middle East. I compare it, Simon, to World War II when the United States obviously dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The alternative to that would have been a massive invasion of Tokyo and the death of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, including many civilians. So that's a choice that I believe Israel, the U.S., the West are faced with the prospect of a nuclear Iran. And you make a good point. If President Trump only has a few weeks left in office, he may be saying that I do not want to leave this Iran nuclear problem to my successor. If that's Joe Biden, look, Joe Biden is a guy who's been very soft on Iran. And Simon, he's talking about re-entering that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. So President Trump may want to make sure before and if he leaves office, may want to make sure that Iranian nuclear program and that Iranian threat is neutralized.
We have one viewer who certainly agrees with what you're saying there, Eric. He says the loss of one Iranian has just saved thousands of Jewish lives. Iran has always desired to destroy Israel, not only as a nation, but the entire population. We then have an interesting question that relates a little bit to some of what you've been saying just now. Do you think President Trump will authorize a military strike on Iranians' nuclear facilities in the remainder of his term? And if so, what do you feel the repercussions will be for the immediate area? I mean, how likely is any further action from the U.S. at this stage?
You know, Regan, that's a great question. I think it all depends on what kind of intelligence that President Trump has. What is coming across his desk? Now, 2 weeks ago, there were reports here in the United States and in the mainstream media around the world that President Trump was reviewing his options with his advisors, with his cabinet, about Iran's nuclear program. Now, to me, that is just being a responsible leader. This came on the heels of recent reports that Iran is enriching uranium at 12 times the amount permitted under that Iran nuclear deal. And various atomic experts and analysts believe that Iran, if it so chooses, has enough enriched uranium right now to build 2 nuclear bombs. So I think President Trump, as the leader of the free world, is just being responsible to review his options. Even Democrat presidents here in the United States, even Barack Obama, used to say all options are on the table when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. So I think President Trump, if he gets some kind of actionable intelligence across his desk, I think he would act. Short window, obviously, only about under 2 months now. If the election sorts out and when we have a Biden administration here in the U.S., again, that's still being worked out here in the courts and with many challenges over voter fraud. But if President Trump were to leave office, even if he knew his time was up, I believe that if urgent, actionable intelligence came across his desk about Iran's nuclear program or some imminent Iranian attack or terror attack, that he would take action.
Eric, in terms of what do you think the response is in terms of the Supreme Leader of Iran, Khomeini, that his chief nuclear scientist, the architect of Iran's nuclear weapons program, was assassinated so easily last Friday? Beginning of the year in January, had the attack on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian terror chief. Knowing that these 2 central figures are central to the regime, and there must be clearly some spies high up in the Iranian regime, either giving the Israelis or the Americans the intelligence they need, because to carry out this assassination on Fasadeh, they would actually know where he was going, the timings of when to carry out this attack, and they had all those details. So surely this latest assassination attack must put fear into the heart of the leadership of the Iranian regime.
Simon, great point. I think if you're Ayatollah Khamenei right now, you are devastated, number one, because look, Soleimani and now Fakhrizadeh, these were 2 pillars of the Iranian regime's terror strategy for the region and for the world. Now they are gone. I would argue that both of them in many ways, Simon, are irreplaceable. And number 2, you said it. I believe the Supreme Leader and every Iranian regime figure is pretty paranoid right now and fearful, because clearly Israel and the United States have assets on the ground in Iran who are able to get to key figures in that regime. Hey, not only that, Simon, just about 2 weeks ago, we had news that Israel and with the support of the United States took out the number 2 leader in Al-Qaeda on Iranian soil. And look back to the summertime where we had this series of attacks, sabotage attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities and ballistic missile factories on Iranian soil. Now, no one claimed responsibility for that series of attacks, but a lot of people think that may have been Israel as well. There's no surprise why the leader of Hezbollah, for instance, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the top Iranian proxy, he is reportedly in hiding right now because he fears he could be next. But again, what a year, Simon, for Iran. Soleimani and Fakhrizadeh killed. The sabotage campaign over the summer against Iran's nuclear and missile factories and facilities on Iranian soil. And then lastly, Israel has hit Iran very hard inside Syria. So really what we see right now is, for the first time in about 40 years, the Iranian regime is actually on the defensive. And they have egg on their face, so to speak, because obviously they are being hit on their own soil. And I'm sure, Simon, that there are a lot of cries and demands from some of those leaders in Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps for revenge. At Fakhrizadeh's funeral just yesterday, we heard exactly that. They're vowing revenge, and I'm sure they are pressuring the Supreme Leader, because this is an embarrassment. This happens on Iranian soil and just the latest in a string of attacks. So I think right now the Iranians are embarrassed, and to save face, I guess you would say, you may see them lash out in some way. But I believe if they do that, it would not be very wise, and it will be met with a very forceful response, either by Israel, the United States, or whoever else they would choose to target.
Eric, we've been talking a lot about Israel and its intelligence. There's a particular story that, to me, I just think it's the stuff of movies. January 2018, it's believed that Mossad carried out an audacious raid in Iran on a warehouse that stored Iran's nuclear military secrets. According to New York Times, Mossad agents moving in on a warehouse in a drab commercial district of Tehran knew exactly how much time they had to disable the alarms, break through 2 doors, cut through dozens of giant safes, and get out of the city with a half-ton of secret materials in 6 hours and 29 minutes. Just an incredible story. It's considered one of the most successful missions of Mossad in its history. The files on Iran's nuclear file provided that the regime was lying. It proved that the regime was lying to the international community and that it was building nuclear weapons and not being used for peaceful purposes. What are your thoughts on Mossad's operations, past and potentially ongoing inside Iran, and why do you think they have been so successful?
I think the Mossad is legendary. Number one, as you said, Regan, I mean, they're, if not the best, they are among the best when it comes to the shadowy world of intelligence. I think a key to their success on Iranian soil is the fact that if you visit Israel, like I have many times, you know that there are many Jews living in Israel today who lived in Iran, who are of Iranian descent. Remember, guys, this is very biblical. Think of ancient Persia, Mordecai, Esther from the Bible. That is modern day Iran. There's been a Jewish presence inside Iran for over 2,500 years. Many of them fled when the Ayatollah came to power in 1979 and made their way to Israel, thank God. But there are many Iranian Israelis who know the Iranian language, who know Farsi, who are fluent in it, who look Iranian, I guess you would say, who are able to easily move in that society and in that country. I think that's one of the keys. Also, I think Azerbaijan, which is to the north of Iran, I don't think that can be underestimated either, because Israel has a very strong relationship with Azerbaijan, and that's a nation, again, right on Iran's northern border, where Israel can potentially collect intelligence out of Iran as well. And lastly, guys, Iran has many enemies, not just Israel, but the Sunni Arab world, the Saudis, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, and others. And they also have enemies inside Iran. There are many Iranian opposition groups who may be more than willing to work with Israel and other nations to undermine that wicked Iranian regime. So, hey, Iran is kind of, they say you reap what you sow. This has been 41 years of terror and murder and maiming across the region and across the world. And now Iran is the regime, not the Iranian people who were the victims of this regime, but these regime officials are feeling it now in their own backyard.
Eric, I just want to ask you, what planet do you think the Democrats are on? I've got a quote here from Ben Rhodes, who was Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications, who said, "This is an outrageous action aimed at undermining diplomacy between an incoming US administration and Iran. It's time for this ceaseless escalation to stop." Then we had Ben Freeman, a defense specialist at the George Washington University associated with the Democrats, said the killing was an act of sabotage against US diplomacy, and interest would likely help Iranian hardliners who want nuclear weapons. And the European Union has called this assassination a criminal act. What are your thoughts, and what planet are the Democrats on?
A planet called disgrace when it comes to Iran, Simon. It was the same reaction when Qasem Soleimani was taken out back in January. We also, by the way, had the former Obama CIA director, John Brennan, calling this an act of state terrorism, the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program. What you have, Simon, and Ben Rhodes is one of the worst, is people who are completely in a morally relativistic mindset. We live in times where good is considered evil and evil is considered good. These are Bible times. in 2020, folks. Let me tell you, the Bible says, when the wicked perish, the righteous rejoice. So when a wicked man like Qasem Soleimani or Mohsen Fakhrizadeh meets their demise, we should not be shedding tears for them and gnashing our teeth. But that's exactly what the Democrats are doing. It's really stunning, and I think it shows you the divide, Simon. It's almost a wheat and tares type moment in the world right now and here in the United States. I'm not shedding a tear over the demise of Qasem Soleimani or Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. I'm sorry. And their absence from the world is a good thing for stability and for world peace, which is what the Democrats claim that they want.
Yeah, so we have one man, Hugh. He says this is a spiritual battle according to the book of Daniel. As Simon has said, this is an evil satanic regime that suppresses its own people, especially Christians. Another has come in. If the Iranians do retaliate, they will once again act cowardly and strike, hiding behind their proxies within Syria or without in Lebanon. And then this from Stephen. Hi, Simon. Iran successfully attacks Israel, who retaliate in strength. The world condemn Israel, not Iran. So Russian, Turkish, Persian, Ethiopian forces with others surround Israel, and he's looking at that passage we looked at a little while back, Ezekiel 38 and 39. God deals with these forces his way. Stephen.
So finally, Eric, great to have you on the program. Can you just share with us how our viewers can watch your program, The Watchman? Because I know that you regularly post very interesting videos on YouTube as well.
Yeah, I think the best place, Simon, would be WatchmanTV.com. That's WatchmanTV.com, Watchman, M-A-N, WatchmanTV.com. You can see all of our episodes of the Watchman TV show. We're on the ground frequently in Israel. And also we do special analysis a few times a week called the Watchman Newscast, all on our YouTube channel, WatchmanTV.com.
Excellent. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's program. And thank you for giving us a real insight into the assassination of Iran's nuclear scientist.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Simon. God bless you guys. See you soon.
God bless. Take care. Wow. So, if we look at it, the beginning of the year, Qasem Soleimani. The end of the year, we have Fakhrizadeh. Between that, though, and Eric was mentioning how, it's not just Israel, it's not just the United States who have issue with Iran. We also have the Sunni nations, and we've been talking recently even of how the U.S. and Israel have seen some peace deals brokered with these Sunni nations. It seems like everything's stacking against Iran right now. They have to be feeling very, very low at this point. Where do you think they're going to go from here? Do you think that they have something up their sleeve, so to speak?
Well, 2021. If we go back a few years and we go back to the Obama administration, we go back to about 2012. The sanctions placed on the Iranian regime were absolutely crippling, and Iran was virtually on its knees economically, which then forced the Iranian regime to enter into negotiations. And what took place is they entered into negotiations. So what did President Obama do? He gave Iran something equivalent of $120 billion US. And what did they do with that money? They built up the regime and they continued to fund terrorism around the world. They are currently supporting President Assad's regime in Syria. They are fighting with the fight and helping, enabling the Houthis in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. They are very much have their terror tentacles across the entire globe, and certainly working to undermine Israel's security, knowing that 80,000 so Iranian troops and militias are only 50 miles from Israel's border on the Golan Heights. And so that's why I was so hopeful that we would actually see another 4 years of President Trump, because if that happened or does happen, then we will, beyond a shadow of a doubt, see the collapse of this evil, demonic regime. But with possibility of Joe Biden becoming president, then the likelihood is that he will then save Iran again from being on the brink. Let's not forget that the Iranians are running out of money. They're struggling to pay their Hezbollah operatives. They've got mercenaries, terrorist mercenaries fighting in Syria, propping up Assad's regime. They are running out of money. They can't afford to pay them. Iran has been hit by biblical disasters, literally on a biblical proportions, as like the plagues that hit Egypt when Moses brought judgment through God on Pharaoh for not letting the Jewish people flee Egypt. The same thing's happening in Iran. They've had bird flu. It's literally wiped out their main source of food, which is chicken. They've had catastrophic floods that have destroyed something like 26 regions out of 31 provinces in Iran, which they haven't rebuilt or restored. The regime is on it in its last legs. So, you know, the fact is that, and I go back to this very famous passage in Genesis 12, 1-3, that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. Any nation that curses Israel, that undermines Israel's right to exist, constantly cursing Israel and the Jewish people, God is the avenger of such people.
Oh, it's an everlasting covenant.
Exactly. So it's only a question of time before this actual regime collapses, because God will deliver a devastating blow to that regime.
One of the things that came across my view in the aftermath of this was that they may very well use their affiliates to particularly bomb Haifa. I have friends in Haifa, know people in Haifa, and obviously that's very concerning. At the same time, this isn't particularly new. One friend of mine who lives in the UK actually has an app on his phone that registers every time a missile is deterred by the Iron Dome. And I know sometimes he's posted on Twitter or something, and there's been tens of missiles fired in the course of
There hasn't been any missiles fired on Haifa since 2006.
Right.
With
For a
Israel's
while
last
in
war
Haifa.
against Hezbollah.
But across the rest of the country, this is an ongoing issue where, you know, there has to be regular deterrence. So Haifa being very, very close,
Israel's
of course,
biggest port, absolutely.
it's a big issue, and certainly we should be praying for the people of Haifa and other more vulnerable areas in Israel.
If Hezbollah fired one missile at Haifa, the retaliation that Hezbollah would receive from Israel would be catastrophic. And let's also not forget as well the massive internal problems that are happening within Lebanon.
Absolutely.
The Lebanese people blame Hezbollah for that massive great explosion that took place in Beirut back in August. So the regime, Hezbollah are losing influence in Lebanon. They're losing influence in Iran, and they're running out of money. And if they dared try something like that, we would see a retaliation that we've never seen before on behalf of Israel in order to protect their citizens.
Now, what's interesting is we were talking a little bit ago about the former head of the CIA and his tweet, and basically saying that this assassination was immoral. But while we've talked about the perspective and context and how it seems to lack any perspective and context, there's no consistency either. Because we can look at Obama, and we can look at how he quite rightly saw through the mission to assassinate bin Laden, so many other operations to take out clear and present dangers to not only national security from the US perspective, but international security. Why is it that we see this political game being played where this action is used to condemn Trump, the Republicans, Israel, and yet actions, actually far more catastrophic actions on civilians even, were committed via drone attacks during the Obama presidency. What's going on here?
Good question, Regan. I think we have to get a kind of perspective on this. And within the Democrats, there's this bizarre love affair for the Iranian regime. Under President Obama and his administration saw that we need to cozy up to Iran because they are the biggest, strongest player in the region. And with a strong Iran, they can do our bidding. So let's not also forget that the Americans under the Democrats have been very anti the Saudis. They haven't been supportive of Egypt. They supported President Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood president. And let's not forget the Muslim Brotherhood are the godfather of international Islamic terrorism. And they supported them against, and we also know that President Obama made that speech which sparked the Arab Spring 10 years ago. Incredible thing, that's actually 10 years ago. And so therefore, when you look at what's going on, it's extremely troubling because it's all about, if we cozy up to Iran, we can say that we've saved the world is a safer place. Iran has agreed to enter into nuclear negotiations saying they will delay their nuclear weapons program. The world is a safer place. We didn't have to resort to military airstrikes to take out their nuclear weapons, so therefore diplomacy works. But the idea is that's not the kind of world we live in. We are, this is one thing I gets me angry about the mainstream media coverage of President Trump. Not one media outlet has actually mentioned that the Middle East has become a safer place because of his presidency. The fact he was able to make a peace between Israel, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, with Saudi Arabia on the way, also Sudan as well in the wings, is absolutely extraordinary. And what he was building was a strong alliance against the Iranian regime and curtailing their ambitions, their nuclear ambitions, their terrorism ambitions, but also let's not forget the hideous human rights abuses that are occurring in that regime, the persecution against Christians within Iran, and it's time to call this nation out.
Marion writes, for evil to flourish, it's only necessary for good men to do nothing. Famous quote there by Edmund Burke. Yeah. On 24th of November, President Trump ordered 52 nuclear bombers to be deployed to the Middle East for potential strike on Iran's nuclear weapons. So how will this affect Trump's legacy? We've been talking about his legacy in the Middle East and seeing a great deal of peace. We have to recognize that oftentimes peace comes at cost.
Absolutely.
Is this going to be sort of a swan song for President Trump?
Well, looking what President Trump's done, looking at his whole policies towards the Middle East, he has engineered the entire American foreign policy to defend Israel and the Jewish people. Knowing that Iran has threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, I don't think he is going to leave Israel in a dangerous position. And so therefore, this is why I also think that they want the Iranians to play into the hands of Israel and the Americans at this time. And I think the Americans are, particularly under President Trump, is wanting to destroy Iran's nuclear ambitions once and for all. Because if he does, then that the world won't face that same danger ever again in terms of the generational threat posed by nuclear Iran. So let's not forget that once you have nuclear weapons, you can't be attacked because of fear of retaliation. But once you've got them, you can then support international terror organizations around the world with nuclear weapons and sophisticated technological terror attacks, knowing there will never be a reprisal because they could fire that nuclear weapon. That is why the West has never confronted China, because they've had nuclear weapons, the same as North Korea. So to actually prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons would be an incredible legacy for generations to come. But we know we're living in the last days. We know that the rapture, the tribulation period is so close. Who knows where we could be heading?
I think it's important for Christians as we sort of look at these periods of time where there's trouble, there's wars, there's rumors of war, to recognize that our eyes and our minds and our hearts need to be fully fixed on Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Sometimes it can be unsettling. Sometimes we can lose perspective and lose sight of exactly what's going on. In this case, we have to recognize that even in these details that seem to some degree, perhaps for some, so far removed from our own context, that this is all a part of the plan and purpose that God has for human history. Every single moment has its role, and He's working everything out in that region in such a way that will accomplish His ultimate purposes. So we should be at peace. We should be active in prayer. We should be watchful. We should continue to love our Iranian brothers and sisters and seek to support them. There are many who have found themselves in this country now through asylum. We should seek to care for them and to understand. I would encourage you, if you know someone, or if you may feel a bit skeptical and think, well, Iran, is it really that bad a situation there? Talk with someone who's left Iran. Without exception, there are multiple Iranians, Christians and non-Christians who I know and am friends with. They're very, very dear to me. Without exception, they have a very, very harsh take, you could say, on Iran. They have seen it firsthand, the immense persecution.
I mean, yeah, we have to make a clear distinction between the Iranian people and the regime itself. But also, I think we need to speak out with moral clarity against evil. 100%. I mean, this is a regime that you can actually compare to the Nazi regime, a nation that chants genocide against another nation such as Israel. They call for the destruction of the United States. They stormed the British embassy back in 2007 and took it hostage. They burned British flags. They murdered British troops in Iraq with IED bombs through their Shia terror militias. This is a demonic regime, and we would see Islamic terrorism literally go right down with the removal of this vile, evil regime.
The beginning of the year, we saw videos after the death of Qasem Soleimani of the entire Iranian parliament standing united on the parliamentary floor together, pumping their fists, shouting out, "Death to America, death to America." So this shows the immense hatred of this regime, definitely. We pray that God would bring His justice soon.
Absolutely. Regan, always a pleasure doing a programme with you, and very much feel like I'm on home turf with tonight's programme. And I just want to thank you for watching tonight's programme. Let's be clear that the Iranian regime poses a clear and present danger, not only to Israel, but the Middle East, and also our own security here. And that's why it's important and imperative that we speak up against the rise of evil, particularly in the form of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies. And we need to pray for the Iranian people and pray that the Lord would somehow bring a collapse to this vile, evil regime that's threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And it's important to understand how close we are in terms of Bible prophecy. So keep praying, keep looking up, keep trusting Jesus in these difficult times. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.